Hello and welcome to China Focus. I'm Shelley Zhang. Hugo Chávez, the leader of Venezuela, died on March 5th. And that's a big deal not just for Venezuela, but for China as well. China is Venezuela's second largest trading partner. So what does the death of Chávez mean for China? Joining us today via Skype from Beijing is Matt Ferchen. He's the head of the China and the Developing World program at the Carnegie-Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So could you describe a little bit the relationship between China and Venezuela?
Sure. It's mostly based on a sort of set of mutual interests around oil. Since at least the late 1990s, China has become a major player in the Venezuelan oil market. And when Chavez became president in 1998, he was very interested in diversifying the trade partners that Venezuela had, in particular, in an effort to diversify away from a reliance on the United States. So over time, and especially over the last decade, the investment and trade relationship related to oil has been the centerpiece of the relationship.
So you say Chavez was interested in diversifying away from the U.S. So has he been, was he the prominent pusher of this relationship with China?
Yeah, I think it actually was of mutual interest for Venezuela. Again, Chavez had interest in this diversification, but also China served a purpose for him because as a socialist country, and China was seen as a potential ideological partner for Chavez as well. That was an interest that he had. China was unwilling to really reciprocate with that ideological aspect, but China, since the early 1990s, has been a net importer of oil, and for the last decade plus has been pursuing actively trying to also diversify its sources of oil imports, and Venezuela was a key part of that strategy.
So do you think that Chávez's death is going to have a big impact on that relationship between the two countries?
It certainly has a potential. I think it's already having an impact. In fact, it started before he died, just the uncertainties surrounding his health and who is in charge of the country. So really, Chavez has been someone who has had almost complete control, personal control, over the levers of power in Venezuela for well over a decade. And oil and his control over the state oil company has been a key part of that. And again, China has been a key partner in that relationship. And so with Chavez removed from the picture, there's just a great deal of uncertainty about who's in control and who China can even talk to about who it's going to partner with on the Venezuelan side.
So Chavez had cancer, or at least we had known about it since about 2011. Do you think the Chinese leadership was looking at this with some kind of contingency plan, thinking, what happens if he died in office?
I think certainly the Chinese side has been knowledgeable about his health condition and has been thinking about who it is that may be in power after Chavez. But for all of that consideration, I think that's still a bit shocking to have him gone from the picture. And the fact is, he has been a very polarizing figure. And so with Chavez gone from the picture, it's unclear who it is that's going to be able to sort of take his place. And with China having been sort of allied with Chavez, it's unclear who they're going to be able to cooperate with after Chavez has left the scene.
So I want to ask you a little bit more in detail about the kind of economic relationship between the two countries. Now, China Development Bank has given about $42 billion in loans to Venezuela in the last few years. So how do those loans work?
Well, the loans have been built up over time, so that 42 billion figure is probably one that is dated to about 1995, when the China Development Bank really became actively involved in giving out these loans. So there have been a series of loans of different size, the largest one somewhere in the range of $20 billion. And these are oil for loans, loans for oil deals in which China has lent money, and the way in which Venezuela has paid is through sales and exports of oil.
So this oil is going kind of directly to China?
Well, this is something, the general impression is that that's the case. However, in my research, what I've found is that, in fact, a significant portion, at least a third, but I think probably more of the oil is actually being resold by China. There are just geographic and refining challenges that make it economically unfeasible for the oil to actually be shipped to China and refined in China. So much of it's being resold likely in the Caribbean and in the Gulf Coast area.
So if the oil is being resold, the money is then going to the state-run oil firms?
That is the best guess we probably have. It's unclear. This is a part of the issue is there's an opacity to the deals, and it's really difficult to know. So it's possible that the money, the proceeds from oil resales are flowing back to China and into some sort of public funds. But it's also possible that the firms are using these proceeds for their own purposes. It's just really unclear.
So if kind of like the conventional wisdom about the relationship between China and Venezuela is that China wants the oil from Venezuela. So if that oil is actually part of it's being resold and not actually being used in China, does that mean that it's not actually as vital of a relationship?
Well, I think it's complicated. Part of this is that these are state-owned enterprises, state-owned banks on the Chinese side. So their behavior, even if they're sort of acting in their own corporate interest, seeking profit, their behavior is seen as the Chinese government's behavior. So this is a really tricky thing, and it's part of a wave of Chinese outbound foreign direct investment that is quite confusing in the sense of, is it private, is it public? So I do think that China is going to continue to be interested as a matter of energy security in diversifying its sources of oil imports, and Venezuela will continue to be an interest. But there is a real question of how the Chinese central government is going to try to govern its own firms to ensure that the oil actually flows back to China and that its firms don't get the country involved in diplomatic headaches.
So do you think that then that the kind of relationship between Venezuela and China is much more economic than political?
Certainly for Chavez, he wanted it to be both. It was deeply political for him. China has really been leery of sort of interfering or seen as interfering or being overtly political in what China refers to as America's backyard, so the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. So China diplomatically has been extremely cautious and has not wanted this relationship to be politicized. And yet what you have is the China Development Bank being very interested in having a relationship, an economic relationship.
Would you say that kind of this type of relationship where China goes and loans to a country that has natural resources that they are interested in, that there's a mutual economic benefit, has China done with this with other countries in the region?
This is a pretty unique relationship in the region, in part because of the unique features of Venezuela itself. Now, it's similar to other relationships in the region because of the commodity-based nature. For instance, China has become a major purchaser of iron ore from Brazil, soybean from Brazil and Argentina, and copper from Chile. So there is a commodity-based relationship with other countries in South America in particular. However, the oil relationship and the fact that you have really sort of one person, sort of populist, semi-autocratic leader like Chavez in a place like Venezuela really makes the relationship a little bit different.
Now, you had mentioned in an article you wrote for The Diplomat last year the kind of the risks of China's relationship with Hugo Chavez, and mentioned specifically what had happened recently in Libya with the regime change there, and in Burma, where the kind of new leadership seems to be turning more away from China and towards the U.S. Do you see kind of like that a difference since then in how China is treating these other countries it deals with?
So part of that is the question, is there a learning process taking place? Because it's relatively clear that the experiences with in Libya and then in Myanmar, Burma, have been relatively traumatic for China in economic terms and also in political and reputational terms, with those countries sort of turning away from a sort of close partnership with China. We don't know yet what's going to happen in Venezuela, but it certainly has that potential, and it has the potential to be upsetting to China, even if it's just in reputational terms. Given how open Chavez was and how friendly he was with China, there is a chance that the new leadership, whoever it is, may temper that closeness, and at the very least be open to sort of making relations with the United States in particular more normalized.
So let me ask, kind of, Venezuela isn't the only kind of state that China has been getting oil from that has like a problematic political background, like Iran and Sudan. Do you think that China is going to be in trouble in the next few years if, similar things happen with those countries that, China, because they've always said non-interference in kind of internal affairs in the country, so they haven't really cared so much about the political situation in the particular countries they've been dealing with economically?
Yeah, I think this is a major challenge of Chinese diplomacy and foreign policy in general. There is too much, I think, reliance on state-owned enterprises that go out and do deals in the name of things like energy security, but that in fact lead China into what I think are unnecessary foreign policy headaches. So I think this is an area where the Chinese leadership, which tends to be very much focused on domestic issues, really needs to start thinking a little bit more carefully about the foreign policy implications of these kinds of relationships. That said, the United States and other countries have faced similar problems in the past, and it's not clear that there is an easy solution to this, especially when you're dealing with countries where you have relatively closed political systems, but that are resource rich. And I think that's the case in countries like Iran or Sudan and then in Venezuela.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Matt, and talking about this issue.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for watching. For more on this and other issues in China, join us at ntd.tv.